Jacob had always dreamed of a quiet life on his sprawling ranch, far from the constant noise of city living. At 32, he had built something meaningful: open fields, cattle grazing under wide skies, and a home that felt like freedom itself. But peace never lasts long when Karen is near. She wasn't just his neighbor. She was the iron-fisted president of the local HOA, and control was her favorite sport. From the very beginning, Karen treated Jacob like an outsider, questioning every choice he made on his own property. When she discovered he had no intention of joining the HOA, her glare hardened into something colder. One morning, Jacob found a letter nailed to his ranch gate, an official notice of eviction signed by Karen herself. But Karen's arrogance blinded her to one very inconvenient truth. Jacob wasn't just another homeowner she could bully. Unknown to her, the young rancher she tried to intimidate had authority over every HOA in the country. She had just declared war against the one man who could dismantle her entire empire with the stroke of a pen. The notice hung crookedly on Jacob's ranch gate, fluttering in the morning breeze like a challenge. Bold letters at the top screamed, "Notice of eviction." He pulled it down, scanning the lines, his jaw tightening with every word. According to Karen, he was in violation of community standards for refusing to comply with HOA rules and therefore no longer fit to reside within the neighborhood jurisdiction. Jacob almost laughed. Neighborhood jurisdiction? His ranch stretched across hundreds of acres, land his family had owned for generations. The HOA boundary barely skimmed the edge of his property, yet Karen insisted that his cattle, his barn colors, and even the shape of his mailbox somehow fell under her control. As he crumpled the paper in his fist, he could already hear the hum of Karen's SUV coming down the gravel road. Right on time, she rolled to a stop in front of his gate, stepping out in her sharp suit as though she were arriving at a board meeting instead of someone's home. "You've ignored enough warnings," she said crisply, her sunglasses reflecting the morning sun. "This is your final notice, Jacob. Either you join the HOA and comply, or you leave." Jacob leaned against the wooden fence, folding his arms. "Karen, I don't think you understand. This isn't your playground. This is my land." Her lips curved into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You'll find that the law is on my side. This community thrives because of order, because of rules. And people like you, you're the reason I enforce them. A young man with too much pride and not enough sense." His temper flared, but he forced himself to remain calm. "You've mistaken my silence for weakness," Jacob replied evenly. "But you'll soon realize your power doesn't extend as far as you think." Karen's eyes narrowed. "We'll see about that." She slid back into her SUV, the tires spitting gravel as she sped away, leaving a trail of dust. Jacob stood there for a long moment, staring at the empty road. She was escalating the fight. But what Karen didn't realize, what she couldn't realize, was that Jacob had spent the last several years in a role that made him her worst possible opponent. By day, he wasn't just a rancher tending to cattle and mending fences. He was the newly appointed Federal Commissioner of Housing Governance, overseeing regulations that applied to every HOA across the nation. The very organization Karen worshipped for her power was, in fact, under his authority. That evening, Jacob sat at his desk, unfolding the eviction notice one last time before filing it with a growing stack of HOA correspondence. He tapped his pen against the paper, considering his options. He could end this with a single phone call, have Karen stripped of her presidency, and dissolve her HOA in less than a week. But part of him wanted her to keep pushing, because sometimes the best lessons weren't taught through authority alone. They were taught through experience. And Jacob was more than ready to let Karen dig her own grave. For the first time in weeks, he smiled. The war Karen had started was about to reveal a truth she never imagined. The man she thought she could evict was the one man she could never defeat. Karen wasted no time. The very next morning, Jacob woke to find 3 tow trucks idling near his ranch entrance, their engines rumbling impatiently. A group of HOA board members, all under Karen's watchful gaze, stood with clipboards and cameras. Jacob stepped outside, boots crunching against the gravel, and called out, "What's the circus about today?" Karen lifted her chin, her voice sharp as a whip. These vehicles are here to remove the unregistered equipment on your property. That rusty tractor in your field? It's a violation. The barn paint? Not compliant with HOA color codes. You've ignored too many rules for too long. Jacob's gaze hardened, though his voice remained calm. This is private land. You step 1 inch past that gate and you'll regret it. But Karen only smirked. Oh, I'll be filing plenty of regrets for you. Our bylaws are clear. We have authority over all residences within the extended neighborhood zone, including this ranch. And once I evict you, I'll repurpose this land for community use. Imagine a golf course right here, or a recreation center. The board members scribbled notes, nodding like loyal soldiers. Jacob could see some of them weren't entirely convinced, but were too intimidated by Karen's domineering presence to challenge her. Jacob sighed, stepping closer to the gate. His voice dropped to a measured tone, firm but almost pitying. Karen, let me give you some advice. Don't confuse a loud voice with real power. You think you can bully people into obedience, but the law doesn't work that way. And trust me, I know the law better than you. Her smirk deepened, as though she thought she had already won. You're just a rancher. A stubborn, arrogant man who thinks land gives him authority. But land without compliance is chaos, and I won't allow chaos. Jacob looked at the tow truck drivers, who shifted uncomfortably under his steady gaze. Turn those trucks around, he told them. You're being used. If you touch one piece of my property, you'll be held liable. The drivers hesitated, muttering among themselves. Karen's voice snapped through the silence. Don't listen to him. I'm your client, and I demand this equipment removed immediately. But the men glanced at Jacob again, sensing something in his composure that Karen lacked, confidence rooted in more than pride. Finally, one of them muttered, We didn't sign up for a lawsuit, and climbed back into his truck. The others quickly followed. Engines roared, tires spun, and within minutes the trucks were gone, leaving Karen fuming. You think this little victory means anything? She spat. I'll bring the county down on you. I'll bring every inspector, every lawyer, every tool I have until you're begging me to leave you alone. Jacob leaned casually against the fence, his calmness only fueling her rage. Karen, you're swinging at shadows. You've picked the wrong fight, and soon you'll see why. She jabbed a manicured finger toward him. Don't underestimate me, Jacob. I built this HOA from the ground up. I run every meeting, enforce every rule, and I win every dispute. I don't lose. For the first time, Jacob allowed a small, knowing smile. Then I'll enjoy being your first loss. Karen stormed off, her heels clicking like hammers against the pavement, her pride stinging more than any wound. The board members trailed after her, whispers rippling through their group. Jacob turned back toward his ranch house, the sun dipping lower across the horizon. He knew this wasn't over, not by a long shot. Karen wasn't the type to back down, and that meant she'd return, fiercer and more reckless. But that was fine, because the deeper she dug, the harder the fall would be when she finally realized who she was up against. Not just a rancher, but the man who governed every HOA in the country. Karen was not the type to lick her wounds quietly. By the next HOA meeting, she had crafted an entire presentation designed to portray Jacob as the menace of the neighborhood. The meeting hall buzzed with chatter, folding chairs scraping against the tile floor as residents packed inside. Posters of community vision lined the walls, but all eyes were fixed on the projector at the front. Karen stood tall in her blazer, her blonde hair perfectly styled, her voice dripping with authority. Ladies and gentlemen, she began, clicking through slides that showed grainy, zoomed-in photos of Jacob's ranch. This is the problem we face. An unruly neighbor who refuses to comply with even the simplest standards. His broken fences, outdated vehicles, and frankly unsightly livestock bring down our property values. If he remains unchecked, we all suffer. Gasps rippled through the room. Some nodded in agreement, but others shifted uncomfortably, recognizing the exaggeration in her words. One older man raised his hand timidly. But isn't Jacob's ranch outside the HOA's official boundary? I thought his property was exempt. Karen's smile tightened, though her eyes flashed irritation. Technicalities. The spirit of the HOA extends to protect the community as a whole. If he's allowed to operate without oversight, what message does that send? That rules don't matter? That anyone can undermine our authority? Murmurs filled the air again. Karen's words carried weight, even if her reasoning was shaky. She knew how to play on people's fears. Fear of declining property values, of chaos in their carefully curated neighborhood. At the back of the room, Jacob leaned against the wall, arms folded, quietly watching. He hadn't been invited, of course, but he knew the bylaws better than Karen did. Meetings were technically public to all adjacent property owners, and he fit that category perfectly. When Karen finally clicked to her last slide, an exaggerated graph showing declining values supposedly tied to Jacob's ranch, he stepped forward. The room hushed instantly. "Funny graph," Jacob said, his tone calm but edged with steel. "But it's missing one important detail, facts." Karen's eyes widened, then narrowed. "You have no right to speak here." "This is an HOA meeting." Jacob raised a hand, silencing her. "Actually, according to Section 4, Article 9 of your own bylaws, adjacent property owners may attend and contribute if their land is under review. And considering you plastered half my ranch on your slideshow, I'd say my land qualifies." The crowd erupted in whispers. Karen's face flushed red. She hadn't expected Jacob to know the rules better than she did. Jacob walked to the front, his boots echoing across the floor. He gestured toward the screen. "Let's talk about these so-called violations. Broken fences? That's a section of corral being rebuilt for calving season. Unsightly vehicles? That's a 1954 Ford tractor. Fully operational, I might add. And the livestock you insulted? Registered purebred cattle, valued higher than most of the SUVs in your driveways." A few chuckles rippled through the audience. Karen's jaw clenched. "Now," Jacob continued, his voice rising just enough to carry authority, "I'm not here to cause trouble, but I'll say this. You don't have jurisdiction over my land. And the more you harass me, the closer you walk toward legal consequences you aren't prepared for." Karen slammed her hand against the podium. "Legal consequences? You don't scare me. This community stands united, and we won't let one man poison our standards." But as Jacob scanned the faces in the room, he saw doubt flickering in their expressions. Some were beginning to question her crusade. He leaned slightly closer to Karen, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "Keep pushing, and you'll find out exactly who you're up against. And trust me, Karen, it won't end the way you think." Karen stiffened, masking her unease with a forced smile. She turned back to the residents, rallying her voice once more. "Neighbors, don't be fooled by theatrics. He's dangerous, and if we don't act soon, we'll regret it." But the seed had been planted. Jacob left the meeting without another word, knowing Karen would only dig herself deeper. And the deeper she went, the harder it would be to climb out once the truth about him came to light. Karen was not used to losing ground. The doubt she saw in the eyes of her neighbors gnawed at her pride, and by the next week, she was in full retaliation mode. If intimidation didn't work, she decided, then she would bury Jacob under so much paperwork, so many fabricated violations, that he would have no choice but to yield. It started with letters. Bright orange envelopes delivered daily, stamped with urgent, HOA action required, each. One accused Jacob of something, more absurd than the last: improper livestock, containment, unauthorized fencing height, excessive, noise due to equipment, improper vehicle storage. Jacob chuckled at the sheer nonsense of it all, but he also knew Karen wasn't acting alone. She had rallied a faction of the board to her side, neighbors who were either intimidated by her authority or easily swayed by her tales of protecting property values. Within days, Karen escalated further. A tow truck appeared one morning, rumbling down the gravel road toward Jacob's ranch. The driver, looking confused, held a clipboard. "Got an order to remove an unregistered vehicle from this property," he said, pointing to Jacob's antique Ford tractor. Jacob raised an eyebrow. "That tractor's not only registered, it's listed in the state agricultural database. Touch it, and you'll be the one needing a tow." The driver, realizing he'd been duped into a bad job, turned around sheepishly. Karen, who had been watching from a distance with her arms folded, stormed off before Jacob could confront her. But the final straw came at night. Jacob was sitting on his porch, the stars glittering overhead when the glow of headlights appeared down his drive. A group of HOA compliance officers, volunteers emboldened by Karen, marched toward his gate. They carried clipboards, flashlights, and a self-righteous air. "We're here to inspect your property," one of them announced. Jacob stood, his tall frame casting a long shadow across the dirt. "At 10 p.m.? You have no legal authority here. Turn around before I call the sheriff." Karen emerged from the group, her voice sharp. "We make the authority. This community deserves protection, and you're a threat to everything we've built." Jacob took a slow step closer, his voice dropping like thunder. "No, Karen, you're a bully who thinks rules are weapons. But you're about to find out that laws outrank rules, and I happen to know the law better than you'll ever imagine." The group hesitated, glancing at one another nervously. One by one, they began to retreat, until Karen was left fuming alone. That night, Jacob made his decision. He had tolerated her harassment long enough. She thought she held power through her HOA, but Jacob had access to something far greater. The next morning, Karen received a thick certified envelope with a federal seal stamped on it. Inside was a cease and desist order citing multiple violations of harassment, trespassing, and abuse of power. The language was formal, biting, and carried an unmistakable weight. Her hands shook as she read the letter. She could barely process the line at the bottom. "Filed under the authority of the National Association of Homeowners Governance Board." Karen gasped. She had never heard of such an entity, and she certainly hadn't expected Jacob's name to be listed beneath the letterhead, Chairman of Oversight. Her mind reeled. Could it be true? That the man she had tried to crush was not just a rancher, but someone who governed HOA law across the entire nation? The color drained from her face. For the first time, Karen felt something she had never felt before: fear. Karen spent the entire night pacing her immaculate living room, clutching the cease and desist order like it was a live wire. She couldn't shake the official seal. The sharp, deliberate wording, and most of all, Jacob's name at the bottom. By morning, she was on the phone with every contact she had: lawyers, real estate agents, even her cousin who once worked in the mayor's office. None of them could explain how Jacob's name was tied to something as authoritative as the National Association of Homeowners Governance Board. This must be some kind of bluff, Karen told herself, though her voice trembled. He's just a rancher. But when she arrived at the HOA office that afternoon, she found her board members huddled around a laptop, their faces pale. "Karen," one of them stammered, turning the screen toward her. "You need to see this." There it was, Jacob's name listed on an official government directory as chairman of National HOA Oversight. Dozens of documents, rulings, and decisions carried his digital signature. He wasn't bluffing. He wasn't pretending. Jacob really did govern every HOA nationwide. Karen's knees nearly buckled. The man she had dismissed as a stubborn rancher had the power to dissolve her HOA with a single order. And worse, every letter she had sent him, every fabricated violation, was now evidence of abuse of power. "No," she whispered, clutching the edge of the desk. This can't be real," but reality was dawning quickly. That evening, Jacob invited the entire community to a town hall, not at the HOA office, but at his ranch. Rows of folding chairs were set up in his wide barn, strings of lights illuminating the rustic beams overhead. Neighbors filed in hesitantly, unsure what to expect. Karen arrived late, dressed sharply in her blazer, trying to mask her growing panic with a facade of confidence. She stood at the back, arms crossed tightly, as Jacob stepped forward to address the crowd. "Most of you know me as your neighbor," Jacob began, his deep voice carrying across the barn. "But what you don't know is that I've spent the last decade working to reform and oversee HOAs across the country. I believe in communities, in fairness, and in protecting people from abuse of power. Unfortunately," his eyes flicked to Karen, "sometimes abuse happens right here at home." The crowd shifted, whispers rising. Karen's face flushed red. "I've watched as letters were sent, lies were spread, and intimidation tactics were used to create fear. That's not leadership. That's tyranny dressed in bylaws," gasps spread across the audience. Some turned to look directly at Karen. She stiffened, her nails digging into her palms. Jacob's voice grew stronger. As of today, this HOA is under review. Every action taken by its board in the last 6 months will be investigated, and every resident will have a chance to voice their concerns without fear of retaliation. A cheer erupted. People clapped, relief and gratitude flooding the room. For the first time, they felt like someone was truly on their side. Karen's chest tightened. The walls seemed to close in on her as the truth of her dwindling control became undeniable. Now, Jacob continued, softening his tone, I want to build something better, a community where rules protect, not punish, where leaders serve, not dictate. And I'm asking all of you to help me make that happen. The applause was thunderous this time. Neighbors stood, clapping and cheering, their eyes shining with hope. Karen, trembling, slipped out the back before anyone could see the tears threatening her eyes. For the first time in years, her authority had been shattered, and she knew Jacob wasn't done with her yet. Karen's pride wouldn't let her quit, not yet. Despite the humiliation of Jacob's revelation, despite the whispers that now followed her in the neighborhood, she still clung to the belief that she could outmaneuver him. But the cease and desist order weighed heavy in her mind. The thought of federal oversight terrified her. If Jacob had the power he claimed, and the documents proved he did, then her reckless campaign against him could lead to fines, lawsuits, or worse. That night, in the privacy of her home office, Karen hatched her last desperate plan. If she couldn't crush Jacob through the HOA, she would smear him publicly. Social media, local news outlets, even whisper campaigns. If she could turn the community against him, maybe she could salvage her standing. The next morning, flashy flyers appeared on doorsteps. Is Jacob really who he says he is? Rancher or tyrant? What's he hiding from us? Karen also posted in local online forums accusing Jacob of corruption, of using his federal title to bully neighbors, of secretly plotting to take control of their land. But this time, the tactic backfired. Instead of igniting fear, her actions stoked anger. Neighbors who had felt silenced for years under her iron grip began to push back. Karen, enough is enough, one resident wrote in the community forum. We see through your lies. Jacob has done nothing but help us, another added. She's projecting. Everything she accuses him of is what she's been doing to us for years. Karen's hands shook as she read the comments. The walls she had built around her power were crumbling fast. Still, she refused to surrender. She barged into the HOA office, slamming her briefcase onto the desk in front of the remaining board members. We fight this, she barked. We do not let him strip away everything we've built. If we cave now, we lose everything. But the board members avoided her eyes. One finally spoke, his voice quiet but firm. Karen, it's over. We've all received notices of review. The federal office is watching now. None of us are willing to go down with you. Her jaw dropped. You cowards! After all I've done. But before she could finish, one of them slid an envelope across the desk. Inside was a petition signed by nearly every resident in the community. It called for her immediate removal as HOA president. Karen's face drained of color. She staggered back, the paper trembling in her grip. No, this can't be happening. But it was. By evening, the neighborhood that once feared her was alive with celebration. Families gathered on porches, kids played in the yards, and laughter filled the air. Jacob's influence had already begun to mend what Karen's rule had broken. From her window, Karen watched it all with a mixture of rage and despair. She had spent years bending people to her will, and now, just like that, they were free. Still, a dangerous thought whispered in her mind, if she couldn't win through rules or lies, maybe there was one last card to play, something drastic enough to scare Jacob into retreat. She grabbed her keys, her mind clouded with desperation, and drove toward Jacob's ranch. The gravel crunched under her tires as the outline of his property came into view, lit by the soft glow of lanterns. Karen's hand tightened on the steering wheel. She wasn't leaving until she made her mark. One final stand, no matter the cost. The night air was thick with tension as Karen's car rolled to a stop at the edge of Jacob's ranch. Lanterns flickered on the porch, casting warm light across the dirt road while the distant lowing of cattle carried over the fields. It should have been peaceful, but inside Karen, chaos reigned. Her heart pounded as she stepped out, her heels sinking into the gravel. In her mind, this was her last chance to reclaim control, to prove that Jacob wasn't untouchable. She clutched a folder of evidence she had compiled, fabricated violations, twisted photos, and baseless accusations. If intimidation couldn't work, maybe the performance of her life could. Jacob stood on the porch, arms folded, waiting. His tall figure was backlit by the glow of the lanterns, his expression calm but unreadable. "Karen," he said evenly, "you shouldn't be here." Her lips curled into a strained smile. "I came to give you a choice. Step down from whatever power you claim to have, or I'll make sure this community sees you for what you really are." She waved the folder like it was a weapon. Jacob's eyes narrowed, but he didn't flinch. Instead, he descended the steps slowly, each stride deliberate, like a man approaching a frightened but dangerous animal. "You still don't get it, do you?" he said, his voice low. "All these papers, all these games, you think they give you power. But power isn't in rules or threats. It's in trust. And Karen, you've lost that. Forever." Her composure cracked, desperation spilling out. "No, I built this community. They respected me, feared me, and you ruined it." "You ruined it yourself," Jacob countered, his tone firm but steady. "You turned neighbors into enemies. You abused the very rules meant to protect them, and now they see you clearly." Karen's eyes shimmered with something between rage and grief. "I won't let you take everything from me." Jacob paused, then shook his head. "I didn't take it. You threw it away." At that moment, headlights appeared down the road. Several cars pulled up and neighbors began to step out. Families, board members, even the sheriff who had been quietly watching Karen's antics for weeks. Word had spread that Karen might try something rash, and they had come to witness whatever was about to unfold. Karen froze as dozens of eyes fixed on her. The folder in her hand suddenly felt like ashes. Her carefully crafted lies meant nothing against the truth that everyone now saw for themselves. One neighbor, a woman Karen had fined repeatedly for improper lawn care, stepped forward. "Karen, we're done being afraid of you. It ends tonight." The sheriff crossed his arms. "You've trespassed, harassed, and attempted to manipulate evidence. You're on thin ice legally. I suggest you leave peacefully before this gets worse." Karen's defiance faltered. She looked at Jacob, at the neighbors, at the community that once bowed to her command. For the first time, she realized she had no one left to control, no one left to intimidate. She was utterly, devastatingly alone, her shoulders slumped. The folder slipped from her hands, its pages scattering across the gravel like defeated confessions. Tears welled in her eyes, and though she tried to mask them with a bitter smile, her voice cracked. "You all think you've won, but you'll regret turning your backs on me." Jacob stepped closer, his voice quiet but cutting. "No, Karen. The only one who'll regret anything is you. Regret for what you've become." She stared at him for a long moment, trembling, then turned sharply on her heel. Without another word, she climbed into her car, slammed the door, and drove off into the night. Silence fell, broken only by the rustle of papers in the wind. Jacob exhaled slowly, then turned to the neighbors. "It's over. Let's rebuild this community, not with fear, but with respect." The crowd erupted in cheers, relief spreading like wildfire. For the first time in years, the neighborhood felt united. As lanterns flickered warmly and laughter rose from the gathered families, Jacob stood tall, his gaze on the horizon. He hadn't just defended his ranch, he had freed his neighbors from tyranny, and though Karen's shadow might linger in memory, it would never again cast darkness over their lives.